Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. For centuries, their voices soared higher than any woman's, clearer than any boy's, and purer than any mortal sound most people had ever heard. They were called the angel singers of Rome, men whose voices were unearthly because they were not quite natural. Behind the glory of sacred music, behind the soaring hymns of the Renaissance and the Baroque, lay one of the strangest and most haunting practices in the history of art: the castration of boys to preserve their voices for God. We finished today with a history brief and a return to some strange history, as if, the main story wasn't strange enough. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On January 27, 1945, Soviet forces liberated the Nazi concentration and extermination camp at Auschwitz. The discovery revealed the full scale of the Holocaust's brutality and became one of the most powerful symbols of genocide in modern history. On January 27, 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were killed in a fire during a pre-launch test for Apollo 1. The tragedy forced NASA to redesign its spacecraft and ultimately made future space missions safer. Story of the day. It began like so many things in European history, in the church. During the Renaissance and early Baroque periods, roughly from 1500s through the 1700s, the Roman Catholic Church prohibited women from singing in public liturgy. The choirs of Europe's grandest cathedrals and chapels, including the Sistine Chapel itself, were entirely male. But the church also demanded beauty, real soaring beauty you might say, and nothing symbolized divine perfection quite like the treble voice, pure and untainted, rising above the basses and tenors. Traditionally, that sound came from the boy sopranos. But as every choir master knew, boys grow up, and with puberty came the inevitable loss of that angelic tone. And so, a grim solution emerged. Beginning in the late 1500s, Italian families, many poor, some desperate, began offering their sons to music masters. The boys were castrated before puberty to prevent their voices from changing. The procedure was brutal, performed illegally but tolerated by society, cloaked in silence and euphemism. The result was a unique physiology: adult men with the lung power and chest capacity of grown bodies, but the high, pure vocal cords of boys. When they sang, the sound was unlike anything else on earth. The church, hungry for celestial music, turned a blind eye to the origins of these voices. By the early 1600s, castrati, as they came to be known, were performing in Rome, Venice, and Naples. They filled cathedral choirs, opera houses, and royal courts. Their fame spread across Europe. To hear a castrata was to hear something divine, a voice both male and female, human and angelic, capable of breathtaking range and power. Contemporary listeners described the sound as liquid gold. Their control, their purity, and their emotional resonance seemed to transcend the limits of human expression. One visitor to Rome wrote, "The sound of their voices fills the church with such sweetness that it seems not of this world, but of heaven itself." Ironically, this celestial art was built on human suffering. The Vatican officially condemned castration, yet it employed castrati in its choirs. In 1589, Pope Sixtus V established the Sistine Chapel choir in its most formal form, and soon after, castrati became its core. By the 17th century, no papal choir was complete without them. They were trained from childhood, often in conservatories run by the church, where they were taught music, theory, vocal discipline, and languages. For those who succeeded, the rewards could be immense: wealth, fame, and adoration. But for everyone who reached glory, hundreds were left behind. Anonymous, voiceless victims of a practice that treated the human body as an instrument to be tuned, perfected, and sometimes broken. The 18th century was the golden age of the castrati, and at its center stood one man, Farinelli, born Carlo Broschi in 1705. Farinelli was the most celebrated singer of his age, a superstar long before the age of celebrity. Trained in Naples, he possessed an astonishing 3-octave range. When he performed, audiences wept, fainted, and threw flowers onto the stage. Kings summoned him to their courts. One British writer described his voice as a trumpet softened by honey. Farinelli's fame spread across Europe, from London's opera houses to Madrid's royal palaces, where he would eventually retire as a favorite of the Spanish court. He earned vast sums of money and was showered with gifts, portraits, and jewels. But behind his fame lay tragedy. He was, after all, a man denied a normal life. He could not marry or have children. His body, altered in childhood, bore the signs of hormonal imbalance. Elongated limbs, soft features, and a voice that was eternal but unnatural. Yet his artistry was undeniable. When he sang, even hardened soldiers reportedly laid down their weapons just to listen. Back in Rome, the Vatican continued to employ castrati well into the 19th century. Their voices became inseparable from the sacred soundscape of the city. The Sistine Chapel Choir was world-renowned for its music, and its angelic voices were almost entirely those of the castrati. They sang the works Palestrina, Pergolesi, and Mozart, whose Exultate and Jubilate was written specifically for the castrato. In the greatest basilicas of Rome, their sound soared beneath the domes and vaults, echoing like divine light. Visitors described being overwhelmed, uplifted, and disturbed all at once. There was beauty in it, yes, but also some unease. The knowledge that this perfection had come at a terrible price. And yet for nearly 3 centuries, society just accepted it. The church, the nobility, and the public conspired in silence, believing that sacrifice justified the music it produced. By the early 1800s, everything began to change. The Enlightenment had brought new ideas, about human rights that is, science and bodily integrity. Opera audiences, once enchanted by the unearthly voices of castrati, began to favor more natural expression. The rise of the tenor voice, dramatic, heroic, replaced the castrato ideal. Napoleon's occupation of Italy and the subsequent unification of the country also weakened the church's grip over cultural life. By the mid-19th century, the practice of creating castrati had virtually disappeared. But the last of them, those trained in the old ways, still sang in Rome. The final echoes of that world would come from one man, Alessandro Moreschi, often called the last castrato. Moreschi was born in 1858 and joined the Sistine Chapel Choir as a young man. By then, castration was illegal and publicly condemned, but the church quietly maintained a few of its aging stars. Moreschi's voice, though past its prime by the time of recording, offers a haunting window into history, because in 1902, he stood before an early phonograph and sang Ave Maria, his tremendous voice captured on wax. It is the only surviving recording of a castrato. When you listen, you hear both beauty and sorrow, a sound hovering between man and boy, sacred and mournful. By the time Moreschi died in 1922, the age of the angel singers was over. The Vatican, embarrassed by its past, quietly buried the tradition. I should finish with this. Modern singers still study their scores, marveling at the technical demands and emotional depth. Yet no one can truly reproduce that sound. The castrato voice, ethereal, powerful, impossible, died with Moreschi. The History Brief. The following comes to us from Strange History by the editors of Portable Press, published in 2016. In the early morning of June 17, 1972, an $80 a week security guard named Frank Wills was patrolling the parking garage of an office complex in Washington, D.C., when he noticed that someone had used adhesive tape to prevent a stairwell door from latching. Wills removed the tape and continued on his rounds. But when he returned to the same door at 2 a.m., he saw that it had been taped again. So this time, he called the police. who discovered a team of burglars planting bugs in an office leased by the Democratic National Committee. This third-rate burglary and the cover-up that followed grew into what we know today as the Watergate scandal that forced President Richard M. Nixon to resign from office in 1974. Thank you so much for tuning in and helping to make this humble show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help me out with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. I truly appreciate all of your support. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.